And now, it's time for coffee and conversation with Dr. Wade.
Hey, welcome to Coffee and Conversation with Dr. Wade. I got two exciting guests here today. I'm going to introduce and then let them tell you a little bit about themselves and what they do in the community. So thanks for tuning in. This is our third episode with many more hopefully to come. But without any more from me, I'm going to introduce Sasha, who works at Two Roads Counseling, and then Erik, who also works at Two Roads Counseling here in Danville, Champaign, and where's the third one? Mahomet. So I'm going to let them talk a little bit about themselves, and then we're going to get into the conversation. So
I'm Sasha. I'm one of the nurse practitioners at Two Roads Wellness Clinic and the assistant medical director. I do nutrigenomics and medical management for mental health medications as well as some primary care.
awesome.
And my name's Erik Cisney. I work at the Two Roads Wellness Clinic as well. I'm a licensed professional counselor there as well as the leadership director. And I worked in schools a lot too, schools around here, and just really enjoy working with that teenage population. So
Awesome. So for the people watching, I'm going to kind of like throw myself, because I don't want anyone to feel alone in this. The term you just used was
Nutrigenomics.
nutrigenomics.
Genomics. Yeah.
The name seems made up. I'm just gonna like
Yeah.
it sounds like someone's like
It's a little sci-fi.
put like three words together. And honestly, and honestly, the first time you like emailed me, I was like, man, I really don't want to come off like I don't really know what's going on in the field of psychology. And I actually Googled it before I emailed you back because I was like, what is this? And so if you could just kind of give us like the short abbreviated explanation of what that is and why you do it as a professional.
It started, we wanted to offer like whole person care and integrative practice at our clinic. So that meant talking to people about healthy lifestyle modification, like how much were they sleeping, or what was their difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up feeling tired, how much caffeine were they drinking, what was their diet like, and trying to help people make adjustments that were good for them or better for them. And then talking about supplements, like should you be taking a little bit of melatonin to help you sleep, or a little chamomile tea, kind of standard things that really readily available. But we found that some people didn't respond well to particular recommendations, but other people really did. And we came across one of the nutritionists that we work with or works with us was doing some genetic research, had been doing it since the 90s. And I kind of nerded out with that. I was like, this is kind of amazing. We can actually tell what people need or what things. So we got into some genetic programs that actually allow us to see your predisposition or risk for insomnia and what things genetically would probably be the best for you to take based on those particular genes, because everybody's different. Well, we realized we could then look at heart disease and gut health and all kinds of other things. So
Genetically? Okay.
So if people have, and we can look at your real-time labs and put that information together, which is really ideal. But if people have, that high risk of high cholesterol because everyone in their family had it, and their parents had it, grandparents had it, we can see what their genetic predisposition is, so we can kind of manipulate that gene activity. We can do particular things to turn some genes down and turn others up, so we can offset that risk genetically just by encouraging people to actually do the things that are best for them. Maybe it's taking some fish oil. Maybe it's really you have to exercise more, eat more fiber, whatever the the healthy modification for life is, and then some supplemental things.
Okay.
Then for mental health, we found that you can actually see someone's predisposition for PTSD.
Okay.
Well, it's really important if you're dealing with someone who's got a lot of anxiety. Is it just anxiety, or have they had trauma responses? Do we actually need to approach their therapy in a different way and not just talk about their anxiety or depression, but really come at it from a trauma angle? I can see genetic predisposition for the likelihood of your serotonin or dopamine being high or low. So that helps us in conjunction with looking at medication, genetic information, which medications you might need and what you might respond well with and have the least side effect to. So that way we're not guinea pigging people as much. We've got a little more information to help better predict what treatments would be best for that individual patient, because it doesn't all apply to everyone. Not everyone needs the exact same thing, so we can really individualize what people need.
Awesome. That's a lot, and I'm gonna have lots of questions.
Okay.
But cool stuff. I'm going to circle back around to that. Erik, I know. Is this something that do you recommend this to your patients, to your clients? Like, how do you sell it to them, or?
Well, I think that's one of the selling points of just Two Roads is that we are integrated health. So when someone comes to see me, whether they start with me or start with Sasha, we talk about this stuff, and like some people aren't big into medication, so we'll talk to a nurse practitioner. Maybe we can do supplements, and then the nice thing is, I get to talk with your nurse practitioner. We get to sit down. We can share this is what we're doing. We can check in because we really want to wrap around that person as a whole. So there's not someone who's managing their medication over here. There's not a therapist here and a doctor here. We're all in the same spot, and we're talking, how can we help this person? How can we get them the best treatment? I've done the first few steps of that, and just some of the stuff that it told me since I've changed my diet. They're very generous about saying cut out or cut down, don't cut out. Because when I saw that I wasn't supposed to eat tomatoes, I'm like, but I like pizza, I like spaghetti, I like barbecue sauce. And they're like, well, just cut down on it. And since I've done that, I've noticed a difference just in the way I feel, even my body weight, all that stuff. I feel much better. And so being able to sell that to a client and say, I'm here to help you with the mental stuff. Let's take care of the physical stuff too, because obviously they're tied together. And the client feels comfortable knowing I do all this in one spot. I don't have to bounce around, and those people are taking care of me as a whole. So it is a pretty good selling point if they're able to do that.
Excellent. Cool stuff. So I'm from the social side. I tend to. More importantly, my areas of expertise are family systems, and I've had this kind of, maybe this will kind of create some more conversations. I've had this interesting. I don't know. I worked in a hospital. I worked with medical professionals. I worked with a psychiatrist. And I know sometimes I tell my students, I'm like, the one thing about mental health, like mental health treatment, diagnosing, is it's the only field of medicine that doesn't look at the organ that it's treating. Like, if you have a heart issue, they don't look at your kneecap. They look at your heart. If you have a kidney issue, they look at your kidney. You have back issues or spine. And so it's like, for the longest time, this really has been, let's just throw darts at the board until one of them sticks. And so as much as the genetic stuff kind of, I always tell people, like, I'm not... I grew up in the 90s sci-fi where they were like cloning people and and it's like, for me, it's like, this is the next step. They're getting everyone's genetics. And I know that you and I have had that conversation, but the idea of being able to kind of look at things from a genetic standpoint, like things like tomatoes, like I never would have thought like tomatoes can impact the way you feel. I don't really like tomatoes, but that to me is just like I figured out why I'm tired. I've been eating tomatoes.
Well, because it is tomato. There's a big there's a lot of components to that, but a lot of it, we know now that there's this gut-brain axis thing. So the whole gut microbiome and, how well are you absorbing? People take tons of vitamins, like without even talking to us or seeing us. People come to us taking lots of things because they've heard that it's good for them. They read that, we know we need vitamin D. They have no idea how much they should be taking. But unfortunately, if you've got a lot of inflammation, your gut microbiome are off, then you're not going to absorb or use any of that stuff well. And we know a huge portion of your serotonin is made in your gut. So if your diet's terrible and you've got lots of IBS, everyone is diagnosed with IBS, there's usually more to it than just a simple IBS diagnosis. But if we can figure out what that inflammation is really from, like wheat, corn, dairy, so whatever, tomatoes, whatever that's from, and we can reduce that, you better absorb and utilize everything that your body's already got and trying to make, and then you feel better. Because inflammation isn't specific. It's all over your body. So if you feel it in one place, it's everywhere. Including your brain. And so if you're, got wheat intolerance, gluten-free is a big trendy thing. It's real for some people. Some people are doing it because they want to feel better, but maybe they don't really need to. We can help determine that. Should you really be on a keto diet? Or should you just eat all the carbs? Like, everyone is different.
I want to be on the all-carb diet.
There are some people who are. They have this big green, eat all the carbs, but, don't eat too much fat and don't eat too much protein. Those are lucky people, but they do exist. And I can help them and be like, you, eat all the carbs. You lucky you. Go for it.
I need you to increase your carb ratio to 90-10. 90% carbs and whatever else you want to put in the other 10%. So
usually that's, fruits, vegetables, and rice. But whatever.
It's probably healthy carbs. You're probably not promoting all right, you can get your carbs from gummy bears, which is
correct.
Where I would like
Food
to
dye
choose
and sugar
all of the carbs I want from candy. I need the Starburst gummy bear ice cream diet. That would be.
However, people who do love that, I do try to get them some gummy vitamins to help satisfy that.
Then you end up taking 12 versus 1.
Well, if you get them enough, got some fish oil gummies, a multivitamin gummy, you can get enough, so you feel like you're getting
eating your vitamins at your snack for your movie.
Whatever you can do to make the people healthy.
Get your regimen of gummy vitamins to go with your popcorn. So awesome. So that's great, and I really enjoyed that you said that we know this connection between the brain and the stomach. And when you say we know, you mean your profession. This is not common knowledge to everyone. Because if it was common knowledge, I feel like diets go in like fads.
They do.
And so, at one point they're like, fat will kill you. And then another point they're like, fat's good, but different kinds of fat. And I think whatever is trending becomes the diet of, a diet of choice. And I know I lost 70 pounds with keto. And I did it for 2 years with exercise. I felt great. But I got to the point, I was like, dude, I can't go the rest of my life without eating fruit.
Exactly.
And it's I'm awesome if I can keep the weight off. So I moved from, eating fat and this and exercising but watching calories. But every morning I'm eating bananas. I eat oranges. I'm like, I just can't give up fruit.
And you shouldn't. And that's what we tell people. The diet culture is really unhealthy. And we try to not ever promote a diet. This is truly healthy lifestyle modification. Making small changes. We really go with the sometimes it's biblical. All things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial.
Yeah.
On Thanksgiving, eat whatever you want because it's Thanksgiving and you should participate in that social interaction with your family or your friends or whatever that looks like. Do that. Go to a birthday party and eat a piece of cake. But then go back to
I'm in for a penny, in for a pound. I'm eating the whole cake.
But that's where you learn how your body tolerates things. If you go through a period of knowledge and testing things out, what makes you actually feel good and having that awareness, this actually makes me feel tired and bloated and whatever that is for you. If you can really be mindful of that, you can identify what really does make you feel good, and hopefully you'll want to do more of those things and allow yourself to have things when you want them and when they taste good. But you'll know that in order to achieve optimal health, mentally, physically, all of those things, that you have to be balanced in that.
Okay.
You have to participate in the fun things. Go out to dinner with your friends. Eat the pasta and eat the roll sometimes. But what you buy at home and stock your pantry with, maybe that's the gluten-free stuff, and maybe it's more fruits and vegetables. But you have to, we never want to prescribe a particular diet, but show you what your body needs and give it that.
Well, I think we could even move that into the idea of culture, and I'm going to pull you in on this, but the idea of, we think of diets as I reach my goal and then I stop.
Yeah.
And I know that's been that's been a problem, I think, in society and in our culture, this, idea of excess. Because I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
I'm like, I like how you're like, have a piece of cake. I'm like, yeah, okay, a piece of cake? Like, I'll have like the back corner.
Leave a piece of cake.
Yeah, I'll leave a piece of cake. But I think that these ideas of like these quick fixes, not seeing and I know I did a presentation on this where it's like, health is not the absence of illness. Like, and we like to think of like things as like, Bob has a heart attack. Hopefully no one out there named Bob had a heart attack, but Bob has a heart attack and people are like, it came out of nowhere. And sometimes it can, but sometimes those things can be related to lifestyles, eating habits, and it's like he was healthy every day until he wasn't. And it's like, I don't think the body breaks down that quickly. I'm not a medical professional, but we can link a lot of things to diet and BMI and weight. And how much exercise you get.
Right.
And so we don't just do it with food and dieting. We do it with really all facets of care. Like, I'll go to the doctor when I feel sick, not when I feel okay, and just check in. And there's even been and I think this happens too, and I know like with medical professionals, every time I go, what brought you in today? Inside of it is built in this idea that I shouldn't be here to talk about my health and my wellness. I should have something for you to diagnose. And to me, that seems like kind of a backward model. So, so I'm gonna circle back around to that. So you're a licensed professional counselor. So my master's, I did counseling stuff, which was cool. I did it professionally while I finished my doctorate dissertation work. And genetics were not, because you can't see it. And the therapy world is really built on what you express and what we can observe. And like that's your two approaches. You have there's lots of different approaches, but it's how are you feeling and how's that impacting behavior and what behaviors am I seeing and why do you think those behaviors are occurring? Do you feel that counseling needs to move more towards this medical kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say the medical model, but this idea of like we have to start incorporating kind of these things in because we're really just guessing. And they're good guesses, but we're really guessing.
I think from the people that I've met that meet with one of our nurse practitioners and just working together, I know they have said they appreciate the fact that it's a whole body thing. It's mind, body, spirit, all that stuff. It's not just dealing with this or that. And sometimes sitting in session doing the talk therapy and stuff like that can help, and it triggers something in them that makes them want to get help in the other areas. Sometimes it's meeting with the nurse practitioners and they get to a spot where they're feeling well enough physically that now they can approach the mental emotional part. And sometimes we're doing that together. Like we're trying to get them to this point where they're feeling good enough and they're getting stuff out in the talk therapy that when they're in the medical side, they're being more expressive there. And sometimes, they're seeing the nurse practitioner once a month, once every couple months while medication's kicking in. And they'll tell me something like, hey, my medication's really, I don't know, I'm feeling weird, I'm feeling off. Like, well, and I get to encourage them, reach out to Sasha or whoever that you're seeing and let them know that. Because sometimes people they don't want to, like, I don't want to tell somebody that what they gave me didn't work, well, no, that's what we're here for. And we get to do that. I don't have to get forms filled out and signatures and wait days for some other organization to get back. I just get to go talk to them about it. And so do I think that helps? And maybe that's an avenue we could move to. Yeah, I think that would be great, to where instead of just being a mental health thing that's separated from everything else, it's together, to where we're working to help the individual as a whole, not just one part of them, and then they're trying to find help for that place, for that section someplace else.
I think it works in opposite too, where we see people medically, they haven't been in therapy, but they feel like they have ADHD, and then you find out they also have a bunch of anxiety, and then genetically, and then through just talking through the evaluation forms and responses to different medications, you're like, you actually have a lot of trauma. We should probably look into whatever therapeutic part. Do you need EMDR? Like, what would you respond best to? Because even genetically, we can look at personality traits and how people are, like your brain drive, neurotropic factor, and all kinds of other things. Who would respond really well to that kind of therapy and that kind of treatment versus regular standard, like therapeutic approaches? We can help fine tune it so that people, even with exercise, like should you do more cardio, should you do strength training? I mean, it's just so varied. We want to get people what is the most effective for them immediately, so they don't spend a lot of time doing a bunch of stuff that's really not going to benefit them, and then they feel like whatever they're trying failed, and then people quit, because we are in that society and the culture of like, I need it now. I need you to give me something and fix it and do it right now.
Why is this problem not resolved yet?
Right.
I've been here 7 minutes.
If we
Right.
if we can narrow that down and say we know this is most likely, I mean, it's not like 100% accurate, and it's not a certain diagnosis, but it is good information to help guide us in the right directions. And therapy comes up a lot, and a lot of people haven't thought, well, my situation is not bad enough that I need to go to therapy. Well, everyone should probably go to therapy. So yeah, whatever your situation is, it doesn't have to be lifetime, like movie level problem. Like it can be little, but it is impactful to you as a person. So go to therapy, like figure it out, so we can encourage more people to be involved in the whole process.
Yeah, I think the stat is something like 80% of people go through some kind of mental health crisis in their life, and sometimes it's just for a short period of time, and that's cool. You come to counseling for that short period of time, we'll get you hooked up mentally, physically, all that stuff, and then send you on your way. My goal is to put myself out of business. I don't want people coming to see me. I want them functioning on their own. So,
well, I would say not put yourself out of business, but put yourself inside of where it becomes a preventative approach.
Yep.
And, we don't tend to put a lot of value on prevention. The dollars are not there for prevention, because you never really know if prevention's working. You just know if problems aren't happening. Yeah. And like, to me, when I used to work with, families or individuals, like it always, like the first 4 or 5 sessions was trying to help them become okay with coming to therapy. And you come up with all kinds of like ways to kind of, and I said I always tell them the way I kind of think of therapy and the ways that I use therapeutic supports is, I think of it as like a ship. Like, ships sail in the sea, and there's all kinds of storms and high waves and crashing things, and like, think of therapy as preparing the boat for a voyage. Like, do you have all the necessities in your support system? Do you have, let's assume that even if something bad hasn't happened yet, that there is something out there on this journey that is going to impact you, and is your boat ready? But that would then require us to kind of look at ourselves more like, what am I prepared for in life? Like, and you can't obviously prepare for everything, but I think that just moving to that somewhat of a preventative model. I know when I worked in the hospital and when I was in college, I worked in an ER, and I always like one of the ways you build is with diagnoses. So like, what do you do for people that come to the doctor to see you and don't have anything wrong with them? I know, like, my health insurance book, I think, covers like one wellness visit a year. Like, well, well, the other ones you have to have something wrong with you, and it's like, what, like why couldn't I check in with my physician, periodically through the year to, look at weight or appetite or how I'm eating, how I'm feeling, how am I, just all of those things. But it's almost like those preventative models are very expensive because you're like putting it, they're upfront expensive. Long term, they're much more affordable, but there's a big initial investment. So I think that's kind of one of the things I've always kind of found. But I also think there's divide between professionals. I mean, I love hearing that you guys have this kind of biomedical therapeutic model, because that's not a new model. The biopsychosocial model has been around for years, but somehow they put dashes in it. And it doesn't have dashes. It's and I know when I used to do assessments, there was like a bio section, and that was basically, what are your diagnoses? Yeah. Like that was it. Like
your physical, actual, how much do you weigh?
Yeah, how much do you weigh? Do you have heart issues? Do you have a history of? It was nothing about like that, the overall health of the human being. And so it's refreshing to hear that kind of that idea of focusing on looking at the whole person. One of the things I come up with, I want to ask, is that we are in this kind of like post-COVID world. The 80% in 2018, I think, what was the World Health Organization or something said that mental health and suicide is one of the global crises, at least in the industrialized world. That suicide is a huge epidemic, and that these things are happening, and they've been increasing rapidly. And now that was obviously pre us shutting down every mental health professional and hospital, and I mean, so there. If you look at the numbers now, they were scary before, and now they're terrifying. Like I don't even know if that's like the word to put on them, but it's like how these things are going up, and even in our own community, we're higher than the national average. And so,
I think that's
thoughts?
one of the things that Eric's probably going to be better at the therapy part, but as a clinic, I think we doubled in size through a pandemic. Because the need was so great. I mean, people were that impacted that our business grew. I mean, that's fortunate, like for us as a company, but that just, I think, speaks to how impactful in a negative way it was for all of the community, all the people. And students, I think, I see the very young population, and then high school students seem to be really, really impacted. College students, I think, are having a little more trouble now going back, is what I'm seeing. Like in Champaign at the university, those students got so used to like just not leaving their rooms. They got to do all their work online. To re-enter these mass populations of people, it's very anxiety provoking socially. It's overwhelming, and I think there's a lot of fear still surrounding all that. So I think it did. Parents, grandparents, loneliness, like it was a really big deal.
Yeah, and I think at the same time that the suicide rates were going up, we saw increases in substance abuse. I mean, increases in domestic violence, every social problem became so much worse than it was before. And I think the thing that concerns me the most, because I do look at things socially. I mean, I primarily focus on sociology and the social psychologies, is we're applying the same remedy to the problem we had in 2020 and 2019, and thinking that same remedy is going to fix the current. It's almost like, well, water puts fires out. Yes, but you need a lot of water to put a forest fire out. And we're not like, this isn't like a leaf fire. this is a forest fire. Like it's just kind of spreading uncontrollably through all demographics, all ages. It's everywhere. And it's like, we're like, okay, well, this is what we budgeted for. This is what we have available. And this worked 4 years ago. It's like, does this approach to handling our crisis? So you've doubled. Are you able to triple? Do you have the professional base to keep growing at the exponential rate you're growing? Sorry, Laura, I hit the table.
Do we? If we had a building, like if we had a big, even in Danville, any of the buildings that we have, we could easily fill it with people. Each clinician could work 80 hours a week and have 70 of them meeting with people every week. But there aren't the professionals, like there aren't enough clinicians, therapists, social workers, and stuff like that. And obviously, we're out of space here in Danville. And I think you talk about changing the way we do stuff. I think that's the toughest part about it. COVID isolated us. We're staying at home all the time. We're not going out to eat. We're not doing, but we're made for that. We're made for community and to be around other people and to do life together. And now people are just scared to do that, and we're not getting back to that. We need to, and we're really divided now on all kinds of issues. Just get on Facebook and you're going to see that. So that's kind of where we're at. Is we need to come back together as communities. We need to, I push getting people into schools, mentor at schools, find a kid that's struggling, find a school that's close, and get in there. Do life, find another family that's in the same stage, find an older family, find a younger family to mentor, and just do that life together. But it's hard to promote that. Even as a clinic, it's hard to, because again, we don't have enough people. We're trying to get enough people in to see them on a one-to-one basis. You ask people to step out and, okay, now after work, we need to go do this stuff in the community. It's like, holy cow, I'm already tired, So it's really about communities stepping up with some of the stuff that's going on in downtown Danville. I love to see, because it's getting people out. It's getting people connected.
Those individuals on the show on Tuesday and talking about like the activities they're doing in the community. And I think the one piece that we haven't really talked about, in certain circles we've talked about it, in certain, but I feel like most of the world is coming and waking up to the fact that our mental health crisis is moved from a crisis to an epidemic. And the reason I choose those words very, very carefully, because I think it was in the 1970s, homelessness was a social problem. But when they shut down all the institutions, it became an epidemic. And basically what an epidemic then creates is what worked yesterday will not work today. It won't. You have to do something that is much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Much more deliberate. Like they were, and we don't talk about the amount of clinicians that left the field because of their own mental health. Like if you think about like working 80 hours a week, taking on the emotions and the feelings and the sorrows and the trauma of everyone you see, at some point you can't manage it. You can't manage, and they're just leaving.
Well, your analogy of putting out the forest fire with all the water, like you run out of water.
Yeah.
Like the resource is gone. It's dried up. Drought. And you have to.
And they're not very easy to build. Like it takes a long time to build a clinician.
Yeah.
And it's not like if we started today, we still wouldn't have.
It's gonna take a couple years.
Yeah.
To get it.
Like if they came to the state of the state, from this point on, we're gonna pay for 100,000 people to go through school to become clinicians so that we can have a huge workforce. It's like, that's awesome, but that's 4 years of undergraduate, 3 years of graduate school, 2 years of postgraduate, a licensure. So we'll get the people in 9 years.
Yeah.
Well, and what kind of people? I mean, you don't get into professions like ours, like yours. First responder, you don't. That's not. I'm going to do that just for the money or because it'll be fun. Or I mean, these are hard professions, and so while that would probably attract people, are you getting the right kind of people? Because then you don't want to cause harm to your clients and everything else. And how do you sell a profession like this? When I taught, I had a student, like I would meet with students all the time, and I had a student that asked me, like, why do you do this? Why do you want to take on my problems on top of all yours? And so how do you sell that as a career path? Like, you get to take on other people's problems, because that's essentially, that's what it is. And it's learning how to deal with that and helping those people deal with it and everything. And I think that's why it's such a struggle. You talked earlier about the need for instant gratification. There is no instant gratification. It does take work, and it takes lots of work, and it takes time. And I'm not saying that to scare people. That's the honest truth. And so, if you're willing to do that stuff, we'd love to have you hang around the office and talk to us about the different things and stuff like that. We'll answer questions to figure out if this is the path you want to go down, because it's such a rewarding path too.
And I would make I know I've seen even recently. I have friends that own clinics, and the salaries are going up. I mean, the salaries in a lot of areas are going up because the demand is so high. And it's anytime there's more demand, then it increases. And it's in every. We saw this happen with the nursing field. We've seen this happen, but I think in the mental health field, we've kind of seen fluctuation, but now we see this. There are not. Everyone, I think the first time I met you guys, I'm like, in Lafayette, clinicians are like unicorns. Like, if you find one, you are competing with 4 other agencies to get that one person. And so, as an individual who also has to pay student loans, let's not mention the fact that 4 years of undergraduate, 3 years of graduate school, you have $130,000 in education. Where am I going to go? I'm going to go to the highest bidder. And so then we see this kind of offset of the people who can afford. I mean, it's just like this is not. It's just not going to go well. And what I find interesting is and I know, like, you're not supposed. We need to get back to a simpler process, and I truly do believe, since if you take COVID out of it, since 2007, we have seen this exponential growth in anxiety disorders, depression. And it's like, is this because we are so disconnected? Like, we were really disconnected, or at least on different sides. We could still see each other, and we were still somewhat interacting, but I think the disconnect was already there. This just put fuel on a fire. And so now, what do we do? How do we get people back to, I don't feel like doing it? Well,
I think there's so many parts to that. Like, we look at the varying trends from those early years of physical health. The rates of obesity have increased dramatically. Well, there's a reason for that. Costs of food and healthy food and fast food and where things are located. There's so much socioeconomic stuff that goes into that, where rates of poverty have increased also. So then they're eating worse food, and we know that impacts your mental health. Like, not exercising, people became more isolated. Nobody walked far anyway. We have more cars, travel, time in the car. Schools we have more people, but the facilities didn't change. They're just cramming more people into those same places. So that in and of itself creates more anxiety. People aren't getting individual small group attention like they did before. And then I think we went through this era of, you didn't talk about mental health. So if you were depressed or you were anxious, nobody talked about it. Like, when I ask people their family history, like, well, do your parents have depression or anxiety? Well, they're not diagnosed, but they do. Like, I can tell that they have an issue, but they never talked about it. And they never had a diagnosis. They never did anything about it. So we have this whole population of people who don't know coping skills. They didn't go to therapy, and their parents didn't teach them any coping. It wasn't something that was talked about or taught in a school setting or anywhere else. So when things like the pandemic come up, nobody knows what to do. Nobody has been given any tool to try to get through anything. And we expect them to. Like, well, you have to deal with it. You have to manage. Suddenly, everyone's supposed to be really good at meditating and being mindful and Well, that takes, we as clinician people, we know that takes a long time. You have to practice it. You have to get good at it. You can't just be like, just go meditate and you'll be fine. Just count to 10.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. It's way more complicated than that. So now I think like what you're doing with the Coffee Connect, like having these groups of people, you don't have to be a licensed clinician to help somebody. You have to have this group like you're starting, like you're doing. People can get together and they can talk and they can share their stories and they can support each other where they feel like they're safe and they're like in a helpful, positive environment. And they can share that life is hard and not feel ashamed about that and not feel like they're alone. And I think that's where we probably have to start doing more of that community and group stuff. Like we've talked about that before. Not everyone has the ability to come into the office to meet with Erik individually, to have an hour where insurance would cover it. Not everyone has that. It's great and it's an awesome process. And if you can do it, you should. But if you don't have that, what else are we doing as a community to offer that? Like Erik going to the schools to try to be a part of that. We're trying to go to the first responders and be like, hey, we're here if you need something. How can we, I think Erik was going to do a ride along with some people, like what can we do to support the community to try to give them as many tools as possible so that they can start to practice on their own and support each other, and we get back to having the village to raise the children and to take care of the elderly and do all those things.
And I would love to hear, I mean, because obviously you're a medical professional, you're a licensed therapist. I'm at this point now where I'm like, I really just want something to point my finger at and blame. Like I just, because and there's no like shortage of blame to go around. But I know when I talk about the, in sociology, there is an aspect where we talk about health. Like there are health sociologists who look at health and all these different things. And I always show them the Prozac commercial from the 90s. I don't know if you guys, for anyone who wasn't watching television in the 90s, they used to have these things called commercials. And these commercials were
that you
basically...
couldn't skip.
And you could
can't
not skip them.
them.
You could not fast forward past them.
2 minutes and 20 seconds.
They're 2 minutes and 20 seconds of captive audience. And I remember the Prozac commercial that came out. And it started out with this song, kind of a very melancholy song. And you see this little kid, you see this, probably young adult male, a mother breastfeeding, a girl isolating in her room, and then you see them all smile, and then the earth turns into the Prozac pill. I don't know if anyone's, and you can, this is on YouTube if you want to see this commercial. And I think that era wasn't mentioned, because I really think that era was the... We've broke the code. Like,
Right.
We have the solution. All you need is medication.
Which is so wrong. Like,
I know.
I'm not anti-medicine because that's part of
'Cause
my
you
job.
prescribe
Like,
medicine,
I
yes.
prescribe it. So, but we published or put it out on like our Facebook page and stuff. But I wrote an article about that serotonin like isn't really the answer, and there's actually not this massive amount of clinical evidence. Like one study got published where they were like, hey, we think this is the key. And then pharmaceutical companies kind of, not anti-pharma, all the things. But
Sasha, as a medical professional, is not anti-medicine.
But
Disclaimer.
they kind of like ran with it. And they were like, everyone just needs serotonin.
Yeah.
Well, it's super not true. Like our bodies like make serotonin. Some people do. And I tell my patients, like, some people don't make it and use it like they're supposed to. Mm-hmm. There is a population of people who really may need serotonin, but it's not the answer for everyone. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's like you need sunlight and you need nature and you need more sleep and you need therapy, and chemically there's really not a big problem. And maybe certain circumstances lead you to not be able to do those things appropriately. Hormone shifts, postpartum, like those people need some chemistry alteration for a period of time. And I think that that's what exemplifies like medicine can be very helpful and it is necessary for some people. But what's advertised on TV and promoted. Like there's a pill for that. There's a pill for that.
There's a pill for your
Take
pills.
another pill.
Yeah.
Because you might have a side effect. You might need another pill to fix that. So let's do multiple pills. Not everyone needs that. And to have people come to us and say, well, I saw that commercial, or like I had a teenager come and say, well, my coach said that I might need some serotonin.
Does that come in a soda?
But do you? And why does your coach think that? Let's talk about how you're responding and what do you really need? What's really happening? So the moral of that story was there really isn't scientific evidence that says, because we can't test it, we can't measure it, that says serotonin will fix depression. That is not.
Yeah, I think on most like pharmaceutical, it is presumed to work.
Right.
It's. I mean, really, if you think about it, if we would break it down, from a scientific method, anything that's a 1-to-1 correlation is a law. So we have very few laws in the. It's not like a tumor. You apply a treatment. Does the tumor change? Does it get smaller? Does it get bigger? You can measure it. And so I think too is there's, going back to your trauma thing, like we now know that like trauma in children impacts the ability to pay attention, the impacts school achievement, academic performance, which all used to be the indicators of ADHD.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a whole generation, we taught attention deficit, not trauma. Now, I'm not saying that ADHD is not a real thing, and as a proud owner of attention deficit, if you've ever spent any time with me, I have the attention span of a goldfish. There are people who have attention deficit disorder, and the medication does work for them. But there's a lot of people that have one thing going on that looks like something else. And I know, I'm glad that you mentioned I always kind of, plug my event. When the whole idea of the Connection Cafe started with just bringing people together. And then it kind of grew into bringing professionals together. And I used to be what I refer to as a silo. Like I had my person-centered therapy is the only thing that everyone needs. And I'm finding myself saying, okay, I need to bring medical professionals in. Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned, spiritual. We have a recovery cafe that shows up. We're bringing. We need every dish on the table because not one of the dishes is going to address everything. We need that spiritual help. We need that medical help. We need that therapeutical help. We need that community engagement. And just trying to say, and I think that's how we work because there's a lot of money behind finding the solution. And you can go back and look at I think the data on the Prozac is the moment Prozac hit the market, depression diagnoses went up by 90%. Like nothing goes up by 90% in a matter of 3 months. Well, the thing is now everything was depression. Mm-hmm. Yep. And, and depression is real. It is very real. And I think that we have to, you cannot fix a problem spending 15 minutes with someone. You cannot address something that is so complex as mental health and wellness. And that to me is the idea that we got to break down these silos. Like we have to figure out ways that, what do teachers need to know? What do principals need to know? Like what do parents need to know? Like, what do I as a professor need to know? Because my students are not the same. They're not. And it's not that I don't even know how to explain it. It's just that everything is difficult. Like everything stresses them out. And it's like you have been kept away from things. And going back to the coping skills, you need other people to build coping skills. Mm-hmm. My daughter, who's 7, the other day, she's like, well, I stay away from the basketball court because the kids over there, pick on the other kids. And I want to immediately protect her and take her. I'm like, no, you're going to have to learn how to deal with being left out and coping with disappointment. Like, it's going to happen. And then you're going to realize that you don't necessarily need to be accepted by that person, and you're going to go off and do your own thing. And so it's just interesting, all the things that we're going through and all the things that are happening, that that we're still operating in these silos, that we're still, you don't have therapists in the schools. Yeah, I mean, it's like, well, schools actually, and I feel for the educational system because it is trying to manage things so far outside of its ability.
Yeah.
And then we're upset with the school.
Well, we've got, friends of mine that are teachers that we've communicated with that are so stressed and overwhelmed because they feel like they're fulfilling so many different roles. They want to just be the teacher. That's what their job was. But they're also having to be a little bit of a therapist and a little bit of a parent, and they're tired. And so we know that we have to try to go in and support the teachers in the best way we can. Like, is there a way for us to get into the schools and have sessions, like when you have their half day, like whatever, can we go in and actually let you vent and give you coping skills so that you can then pass them on to your students? Because if we don't support the people in all those roles, no one's going to benefit.
Yeah, and they're burning out at exponential rates anyways.
Yeah.
So it's been a steady decline. Because I would even go back to teachers spend 4 years learning how to do lesson plans, deliver information, measure achievement. They don't get behavioral training.
Right.
They don't get, diagnostic training. They don't get psychological training. Like,
the first year of teaching is the hardest year.
But it's like you expect them to know that. And it's like, so they're operating on what they find on MD or WebMD. We become a WebMD generation.
Yeah.
Google it.
Right.
And it's like, so we either have to build new teachers, or we have to build supports into schools that allow we can't have it both ways. You can't have a teacher who's also a clinician, because which takes the precedent. So if the kid's having problems, that takes all of your attention to the one, and you exclude the other 25. Like, that's not a success. That model cannot possibly work long term. And I know in every community, it's not just Danville.
No.
Every community in the country, the school systems are overwhelmed. The teachers are overwhelmed. The administration is overwhelmed. Like, and then we're like, well, why aren't you successful? Like, it's like, well, because we don't have the tools. You want me to build a house with a hammer? That's all I have is a hammer. And so to me, it just, maybe we need to bring some educators in and kind of get their feel on and I bet they have some extremely good insight.
I bet.
Oh, yeah.
I bet they have. If there are any teachers listening who would like to come and talk about the insight you have, please contact us at DAC. I do want to spend a little bit of time with, you talked about spiritual, and this is kind of, I am not a religious person. And for the longest time, I always associated spiritual health with religion. Those are not actually the same thing. I'm kind of learning that those are entirely, can be entirely separate, but they can be the same, but they can also be separate. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about what do you mean by spiritual health or being well spiritually?
Well,
to the best of your ability.
Yeah, and not any specific faith or spirituality or whatever, but studies show that if there is spirituality involved, the number of people don't necessarily, it's not like a huge number of people that get better, but they stay better longer because they have that support. Because a lot of times when you're talking about spiritual stuff, there's a community, there's a faith community that they belong to, so they have that support around them. And churches are becoming more aware of that and what role they play. Churches, across again, it's not any specific faith. I think everybody is waking up to the fact that we need each other. So when you talk about, and that was something that was in my program, it wasn't just biopsychosocial, it was biopsychosocial spiritual. And I kind of hope they don't discover anything else, because that word is getting really long as to what we need to pour into. So I offer Christian counseling, and I have people that take advantage of that. I have people who want nothing to do with faith, which is cool too. I will sit with them and talk with them just like anything else. But that faith part, making sure that people are spiritually healthy, is just another component. If that's something they believe, if that's something that's part of their life, that's something else we need to talk about. It's like Celebrate Recovery out on Tuesday nights at Second Church, where it's a faith-based recovery program, and there are people that that go out there for hurts, habits, and hang-ups, which who doesn't have a hurt, habit, or hang-up, and that plays a huge role in their life. There are other places, people say I go to this church or this synagogue or whatever it is, and that's where I get my support is from my faith community. So that's why it's so important. If that's important and they're struggling in that area, then let's talk about it. What does that mean? How do you build up that part of you so that it's functioning at the same level as the mental or the physical and everything else? It's part of what makes us up, part of who we are. So let's figure out how to make it healthier. So
yeah, I know some of the things that I've struggled with. Not struggled with, but the idea of what I struggled with kind of separating those two things from, spirituality as it revolves around religion and church and community. I think of spirituality as that it's this like interconnected energy between us that we know that if Sasha's in a bad mood and I'm sitting next to her, my mood is going to change. Now, it's not magic. I don't think it's like hocus pocus, but it's the idea, it's the energy that is around us. And I think that, are we getting good energies? And now, if there are any former professors of mine listening, I'm not saying that we need to move to energy-based society, but there is something. If hospitals, like I know when I worked in like psychiatric hospitals, they have soundboards. They have things that absorb energy. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, why would you want to absorb energy? Because if you walk into a room where there's something bad going on, you feel it physiologically. No one has to tell you there's a problem. And so I kind of think about this aligning spiritually, emotionally, is the connection and the energy we share with other people. And how do we keep that? If you're not doing well really does impact me, whether I can see it or not. In some way, we're all connected. And I think looking at that community element, and church does provide, religion does provide a community element. It's a set of shared beliefs that bring you together. They offer great potlucks. So
they used to.
They used to anyway.
Pre-COVID.
If anyone's still doing potlucks, please send us an invite. But I think we need to start thinking about that idea of that it's not all individual ships. It's one big giant ship, and we're all connected. We're all impacting one another, and we really need to figure out a way to create this shared sense of we gotta do this. Like we have to come together and do this. And I think we're so stuck, and I just want to take care of my yard.
Yeah.
And the rest of the yards are falling apart, my yard's fine. And as long as my yard is fine, even though if all the yards around you drive down your price. I mean, it's like we just want to focus on our own yard.
That's one thing. Like she talked about trying to work with the first responders and things like that. We've been trying to figure out how we can help the people who help the people. Because if teachers are in a good spot, because we know you can walk into a school, like you said, you walk into certain buildings and you're just like, whoa, there's something not right about this place. Or you walk into other places, you're like, hey, this is someplace I want to be, because it feels like everybody. And usually, if you look at those spots, if it's a school, if there's a lot of negative teachers because they're burnt out, because they're frustrated and everything, it carries over to the entire school. You feel that when you walk in. But if you take care of the teachers, each one of those teachers has 25 to 30 kids they see every hour. So they see hundreds of kids throughout the day. So they're better able to take care of them. If nurses are in a better spot, mentally, biopsychosocial, spiritually, all that stuff, they're better able to treat however many people they're seeing, on a daily basis. So that's kind of what you talk about with the community. You take care of them, they take care of more people, then those people get to go, and then since they're in a better spot, they go to their communities, and they get, well, how can I take this to somebody else? So that's kind of the goal, that's what we talked about, and that's what I like about Two Roads and working there is we're focusing on individuals, but we're also like, how do we get out in the community? How do we help the community? Whether it brings us more clients or not, that's not the goal. It's like, how do we help our community get better?
And I think circling back to like the energy thing, I think one of our owners and therapists she's very empathetic, so she has that ability when she walks into a room, she'll be like, I feel like there's there's a lot of anxiety, and she'll identify that. And so we've talked about that. How do you do that and then not feel completely exhausted from that? Because I have some of those patients that I interact with that you can just feel they're heavy, and you have to be able to identify that so you can kind of match them for a minute, because you don't want to be the big positive like when their like energy is really low. And so you do have to kind of pay attention to that so you can kind of match them but bring them back up to where you are. Can you lower yourself a little bit so that they don't feel overwhelmed by your positivity, and then help lift them back up a little bit? And I think that's one of those energy kinds of things. I had another friend of mine who has a Facebook group, was talking about how this positivity movement may have actually been slightly damaging in some regard, because we've made people feel like it's not okay
to not be okay.
not be okay. Like, we have T-shirts at Two Roads to say it's okay to not be okay. Like, and I think it is good that we encourage people to try to be positive, or to try to find a positive, and to search for that energy in whatever way that comes to you. But it's also okay if it's really bad sometimes. But I think that being aware of that, which means we have to slow down and not be so busy all the time. And we've talked about this before, being intentional with your interaction with someone. When you're like, hey, how are you? Do you really mean like,
Do you really mean
are
how
you
are
really
you?
asking like, how are you? And how do we have 3 minutes to talk about? It doesn't have to be a really long time, but can we actually talk about that? And are you paying attention to that connection with that person? What do they really feel like? Do they seem like they're really okay? I think we work in an environment where everyone has a little bit of that. So when we walk by each other, we're like, what's wrong with you? We don't even have to ask. We can just kind of sense that with each other. But we have to really give the time and the space to ask that question, to really feel that, and make that an interaction where we can help each other and change that energy and share it.
Yeah, I kind of like to think that I dearly, my areas, like I said, family systems. As a sociologist, I tend to focus on very small systems that impact the larger systems versus the larger systems that are crashing down on the individual or the family. And I find this very interesting. Somewhere, I don't want to use the word empathy or even sympathy, but I feel like when I was growing up, and I know that people, especially maybe young people, are getting so tired of hearing this. Well, when 20 years ago in the 90s, when I was a kid, but I do believe growing up, I had to force people out of my life. Like, they were always trying to be involved. My parents, my teachers, like, there seemed to be this inherent like investment we had in other people. And now it's like, all right, we still have to pretend that we're invested in how everyone's doing. And so I'm going to figure out how to cram a 2-hour interaction into a 5-minute time space. And it's like, does that cause worse? Because if someone feels that they are not being accepted or being heard, and then someone pretends to hear them and then shuts them down, what does that do to us? Because we're just like, I just want going back to my front yard. Like, I just want to get through my day. I just need to get through my day with as little. It's like, but if we're all just trying to get through our day, are any of us really getting through our day?
No,
or are we
'cause
just
then you're not only not heard, you're devalued.
Yes, that is a I think a great way to put it. And I don't know if we need to start training. I mean, like I said, it's not that. I mean, the 90s had their problems. I mean, obviously had all kinds of problems in the 90s or early 2000s. But I remember feeling as a teenager and looking back, it's like, man, I had a lot of people in my life that cared about me. I didn't necessarily want to be around them, because I wanted to, move away from the secure base. But, I had teachers that looked in on me. I had teachers that checked in on me, and, family members and friends. And it just now seems like we're just like, just do a status update. Like, if you need us, do a status update. We'll message you tomorrow.
We'll comment.
We'll
Or
comment.
like your-
We'll tell you to.
We'll reassure you with our thumbs up.
Yeah, and I think too there is that we going through those eras. Like, it went from the you have no problem era, like there isn't a problem, you have nothing to be unhappy about, to, okay, let's say there is something you're unhappy about. Let's pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And then we moved into the era of like, can't you just be happy and be positive and just change the way you think? Quit thinking negatively. Yeah. And then we moved into, let's just use medication. And it's like, we just like, and I think there's value in all of those things, but not separately. Like, does that make sense at all? If we just like, this is the cure. Well, what happens when that doesn't work? Well, you have to find the next cure. Well, I don't think there's one cure. I think there's multiple remedies that may end up curing the problem.
I think that's what's awesome for us is Erik can see somebody for multiple sessions and I feel like you can't even engage. You're so anxious you can't even engage appropriately in your coping skills at home because you're like on 10 and we can't get you to even utilize the coping to bring you down to a 5. So maybe they come and they see me and we look at their nutrition and their genetics. We talk about how much coffee are you drinking and should you kind of bring that down to maybe not so much or decaf or whatever the thing is.
You totally
I love coffee. I'm drinking
that.
coffee. I know because I was
totally,
like,
you're like, maybe
drinking
bringing the coffee down. I get it.
But where people are like, well, I'm really anxious and I can't sleep, but I drink 3 pots of coffee a day and I don't really know what's wrong. Well, maybe we should. I can look at that genetically. How quickly do you break down coffee? Are you sensitive to it? We can see those things.
I think I'm going to have to come in and get some genetic testing.
It's really fun. But then I can also see, like, what's your anxiety look like? And is it anxiety? Or is it stress? Or do you have ADHD and you feel anxious because you can't focus and everything is overwhelming because your brain's like, but it's your normal. You don't know that it shouldn't feel that way. And then what medicine do you need? Is it a dopamine problem, a serotonin problem? You have difficulty breaking down cortisol and adrenaline. What is the thing? So how do we best manage that? And then I go over to the other nurse practitioners who do more medication management because my focus is that weird gene stuff and say, hey, this patient of yours, here's what their genetic information looks like. Here's what Erik is seeing in session and has diagnosed them with from his perspective. Now, how do we come up with the best plan? And do we need to also check their thyroid? And we saw that in their genes that they have high risk for hyperthyroidism. Maybe that's a problem. Let's order some labs. We can do that whole thing and be involved in all of it.
And I think that helps because it gives the person a picture of what's going on. And we live in such a world where you try to really guard what people see about you. So when you're in a session, whether it's a nurse practitioner or a therapy session, that wall's still up. Like I don't want this. I don't want this person to think negative of me. I don't. But that's you have to be willing to let down those walls. So if they know, oh, I really do have this going on in my body, maybe I should talk about it. And once they realize it's a safe place for them to talk about those things, and that it's not like as soon as I get out of session, I'm posting on, this person, they got all this stuff going. No, it's like that's the safe place to let down the walls, to not worry about the FOMO stuff and all that things that we do, and just to really talk about what's going on, because then that leads to the more authentic life outside of the session. And sometimes all this information we give them, they're like, okay, I do have something I need to work on. So let's figure out what this looks like.
Yeah, I think I go back, and I know we're going to be closing up here in a second, but I go back to this idea of, we diagnose the leaves, not the roots. And, based on what shade the leaf is, whatever we can see is what we assume we're seeing. And I never used to think that way. I put a pool in during COVID. I came up with lots of new activities and hobbies. And I was talking to someone who obviously knows more about taking up trees and roots. And I was like, I keep running into these roots, and they haven't been a tree here for like 20 years. And these roots aren't breaking. They're green, full of,
wow.
And they went on forever. So even if you take out the problem, the tree's dying, you cut down the tree, the roots that have killed that tree are still very healthy. And you didn't get rid of the problem. And I think that there has to be a way for us to drill down. They used to say more eyes on people, but I think we need to figure out ways to help people know what to see, how to ask. I think there's some things we need to do about maybe reprioritizing our time and our energy, and how we're focusing that and enrichment. That's the other thing too, is like, I kind of think of it as an educator, like, yes, my job is just to teach people, but I also want to enrich them. I want to have an enriching experience. I want a relational experience, because I am not just involved in your academic success. I want you to be good as a functioning human in society, that you are going to go out and help people. And all of these things are connected, but it's just like it seems like we're just kind of rushing to try to find the fastest solution to this problem. And it's like you're wasting so much, because we're jumping from solution to solution to solution. And going back to kind of like what you said is you do come up with a plan, but you also have to come up with a way to measure whether or not that plan's working. Because that, I think, is a lot of the problem, because people do become hopeless. Like, you said this should work, and it didn't work, and now you're telling me this should work, and that didn't work. And it's like, so why should I try? Versus, here's what's working, evaluating and measuring what's working. And so there's just a lot of things. I mean, we could spend hours talking on the process of treatment plans and going about helping people. I think too is just the key takeaway is that we need to move back to that community element, that relational element, having people. I think I had read a statistic somewhere, like if one person has one person they truly believe cares about them, like this potential of like suicide and suicide attempts goes down dramatically. And that's just one person. Like, that I have one person that would truly miss me or does truly care about me, versus just all the people that say they do. And so I think we really just need to get back to authentic, genuine interactions. So, well, Sasha, Erik, thank you so much for coming in. Audience, appreciate you tuning in to the podcast, the conversation, and I look forward to seeing you next time.